I really encourage women, approach this with curiosity and excitement. Approach this as a self-care period of time where you truly meet your needs. So we drink because we're stressed out, or because we're overwhelmed, or because our spouse is pissing us off, or because our kids are tough, or our boss is a nightmare. So we've stopped problem solving for those emotions, right? It's like happy drink, sad drink, angry drink, bored drink. And so just sitting there and being like, okay, why do I want to drink? What emotion am I feeling? How else could I solve for that?
That was Casey Davidson on Psychologists Off the Clock. We are 5 experts in psychology here to bring you cutting-edge and science-based ideas to help you flourish in your relationships, work, and health.
I'm Dr. Debbie Sorensen, a clinical psychologist practicing in Mile High, Denver, Colorado, author of Act for Burnout and Act Daily Journal.
From America's Heartland, I'm Dr. Emily Edlin, a clinical psychologist based in Chicago, Illinois, and author of Autonomy Supportive Parenting.
Calling in from Vienna, Austria, I'm Michael Herold, a coach, confidence trainer, and the author of an upcoming book on developing your confidence and social skills.
From Boston, I'm Dr. Yael Schoenbrunn, faculty at Brown University and author of Work, Parent, Thrive, and an upcoming book about misunderstanding.
And from coastal New England, I'm Dr. Jill Stoddard, author of Be Mighty, The Big Book of Act Metaphors, and Imposter No More.
We hope you take what you learn here to build a rich and meaningful life.
Thank you for listening to Psychologists Off the Clock.
Hey listeners, this is Jill's daughter Spencer. You're about to jump into my mom's interview, but first, just a quick reminder that you can now listen to the podcast ad-free by becoming a supporter on Patreon. You can link to Patreon on the POTC website or go to patreon.com/offtheclockpsych. And if Patreon isn't for you, but you want to help my mom and her team out, you can do so by sharing this episode with someone you think might benefit. Now here's the show.
I'm here with Yael to introduce today's episode with Casey Davidson. And today we are talking to listeners who have ever been sober curious. And we decided to do an intro to this one instead of a host-post chat for a couple of reasons. One, this is a really long episode that we debated splitting into 2 episodes, but ultimately decided it made the most sense to keep it as 1 episode. And part of the reason that it's long is because I share a lot of my own personal experience, a personal story, and Casey, who has been sober for 9.5 years, shares a lot of her personal story and her personal experience. So you can listen all in one go, or you can split it up into your own 2 episodes. So what were your thoughts, Yael?
I thought it was a terrific episode. And one of the things that I liked the most about it, and that I like so much about being sober curious, is how well it aligns with the concept of psychological flexibility, which for those of you who aren't super familiar with it, is a concept that comes from acceptance and commitment therapy. And it's like the thing that we're always going for with our patients, with our clients. And that's the idea that we keep doing what makes sense based on our values and our context, or we stop doing the behavior if that's what makes sense given our values and our context. And I think that so much about sobriety that gets really sticky is that people feel forced into being abstinent when they're not ready. And sober curious allows you to be more experimental of like what works for me. And I'll just do a tiny spoiler here, which is that, you guys talk about drinking non-alcoholic beverages. And it's like this question of, does it work for you or does it not? And I think the same thing goes for like trying out sobriety, or if you're not ready, trying out drinking in a more moderated fashion. Like, does it work? Can you stay flexible, or are you getting too rigid? And so, it's really this question of like what works for you and being willing to kind of test and take in the data as you test.
Absolutely. I think you are spot on about that. And I think why so many people, which we talk about in the episode, but why so many people feel intimidated to even sort of think about sobriety is because there is so much messaging out there that's very black and white. It's like you have to stop completely and forever. And the only way to get sober is AA. And the opposite of psychological flexibility is rule-governed behavior. And there's a lot of rule-governed behavior when it comes to ideas about what an alcoholic is and what sobriety must be and what it looks like. And I think this newer sober curiosity movement, you're absolutely right. It really infuses flexibility right into it. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, even the word just feels like gentle and curious and like flexible, like the two words, I suppose, which I love. And I also think it really destigmatizes the way that you're experimenting with relating to alcohol or other substances. There is so much stigma. So anything that we can do to sort of decrease the stigma that increases people's willingness to try different things to see what works well for them is so important.
Yeah, absolutely. Totally agree.
One other thought that I had too, and you guys talk about this later in the episode, and I really loved that you got here, is this piece about our social networks and drinking. So early in my research, I did a lot of alcohol research. And one of the things that I looked at was behavioral couples therapy for substance use disorders. And one of the things that we know is harder is when one person is quitting and the other partner is not. And so I love that you gave some advice about talking it through with your partner and working through some of the myths that we have that you can't quit or that your partner isn't going to be supportive. But it is something to have conversations with your partner about, because we need support when we're making big behavior change. And we don't necessarily need it from our partner, but sometimes that's going to come from our partner in ways that we don't anticipate. But if it's not, we can seek it out elsewhere.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. Well, listeners, if any of you are sober curious, I would truly love to hear from you. I'd love to hear if you try any of this out and how it goes. And I'm happy to be part of your sober community. Hey, everybody, it's Jill here, and I am so excited about today's guest. I have Casey McGuire Davidson here with me today. Casey is a life and sobriety coach and the host of the Top 100 Mental Health podcast, the Hello Someday podcast for sober, curious women, which I actually had the honor of being a guest on to talk about managing imposter syndrome without drinking. Casey is an ex-red wine girl who spent 20 years climbing the corporate ladder while holding on tightly to her love of wine. She is now passionate about helping other busy women stop drinking and create lives they love without alcohol. Her work has been featured on Good Morning America, NPR, HuffPost, the New York Times, and NBC News. Casey, welcome. I am so excited to have you here today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So this whole idea of sober curious has become a movement. And I actually got one of your newsletter emails this morning. And you mentioned articles in the Washington Post, Vogue, and CNN with titles like, "Is the sober curious trend here to stay? Has everyone stopped drinking?" And the buzzy new drinking trend is no booze alcohol. So I wanted to have you on because I think this is such an important and timely conversation, specifically for listeners who maybe like me are feeling maybe a little ambivalent or even a little uncomfortable or unsure around their relationship with alcohol, but don't see themselves as alcoholics. You know, maybe they haven't gotten a DUI or lost a job or relationship. They don't need rehab or AA. And so for me, you know, I saw my consumption increase with COVID, as I'm sure many, many people did. And since then, I've had these like ups and downs. So sometimes I'm drinking a glass of wine or two every day, and then I'll do dry January, or I'll go back to one or two every day, and then I'll decide to only drink socially or on weekends. But even that just started to make me not feel great. And I know you have a similar story, and we're gonna get to that in a sec. But I have a new mom friend, and you know, she came over one night, and of course, I thought we'd like talk and get to know each other over a couple glasses of wine. But she shared with me that she had been sober for, I think it was like 5 years. So we ended up having this really open conversation, and I told her that I've been sober curious for a while. And she recommended this book called The Naked Mind, which I listened to. And then I started listening to your podcast. So of course I was familiar with it because I was a guest, but I really started listening to the episodes, and I found all of it so incredibly helpful. And it motivated me to decide to do Sober Summer. So my last drink was Memorial Day weekend. And so between now and Labor Day, I'm not going to drink. It's been 2 weeks and it's going great. But there is so much stuff, so much baggage that comes up around this, fears that people won't invite you out places if they know you don't drink, or they'll think you're boring, or you'll be bored, or people will judge you and think you must have a problem if you don't drink anymore. Fear of failure, like that you won't be able to stick to it. So that is what we have Casey here to talk about today. All of this, she's going to dispel some myths and give everybody some great tips for anyone who, like me, is sober curious too. So Casey, to start, why don't you tell us a little bit about your story, your journey from being that daily red wine drinker to being sober for 9.5 years now without AA or rehab, and now helping others to travel that same path?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think one of the things I just wanted to say, because you shared so much great stuff in framing this conversation, is I love the sober curious movement. And I love it specifically because it lets people talk about their relationship with alcohol or think about their relationship with alcohol without the baggage that used to be associated with deciding to take a break or stop drinking completely.
Yeah.
It was sort of the third rail that nobody ever talked about, right? We will talk about diets and anxiety and therapy and struggles with teenagers, but we wouldn't talk about our worries about alcohol consumption. But if you talk about alcohol, somehow you're worried about being judged. So in the last 5 years, 6 years, the sober curious movement has completely taken off, and it's taken off in the mainstream, which is amazing. And that allows people to take a break from drinking, see what their life is without alcohol, without the questions about, do you have a problem with alcohol? So anyone who's thinking about doing sober summer or thinking about taking a break from drinking or even evaluating it, you can tell people that now and they'll be like, oh, good for you, right? No judgment. No, I have a problem. Just like, I decided to do sober summer. It's a health and lifestyle choice. So you asked me about my story, and it was a little bit different because I stopped drinking before the advent of the sober curious movement. So just to frame a little bit about myself. So I grew up moving kind of all over the world. My parents were diplomats. We lived in Africa and South America and Australia and you name it. And then I went to boarding school in high school. So what I would say is I was a very good girl and also very concerned about what other people thought of me because I was constantly the new girl and trying to blend in. And also when I went to boarding school, the government was paying for my boarding school. And if you drank, you would be suspended the first time and expelled the second. And my father was an ambassador. My mom was in, the foreign service as well. So basically, I was terrified to get into trouble. All that is to say is I went to college and joined the women's rugby team, which if you know anything about rugby, it is a crash course in problematic binge drinking.
I did not know that.
They literally teach you how to do it. I mean, I was introduced to keg stands and boot and rallying, which means you drink, throw up, and drink again.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it was, and I loved it, which is the thing, right? And I was like, this is amazing because all of my sort of overthinking and people pleasing and good girl tendencies tended to fall back to the back corners of my mind.
Right.
And I went through college and drank heavily and still straight A's, magna cum laude, did all the right stuff. I mean, I was still a good girl, but I also saw alcohol as my path to adventure, my path to talking to people that I might not have otherwise, and my sort of symbol that I was exciting and rebellious and fun and you name it. So growing up in the foreign service, diplomats, I always saw like a bottle of wine on the dining room table. This is what people do in the evening. And not only that, but dinner parties with the wine glasses and the noise and people laughing and all the, that was what I envisioned as the happiest place on earth. So I graduated from college, moved to Washington, D.C., was terrified about my first job because didn't want to fail, and had no idea how to cook because I had gone to boarding school and then college. So I used to sit around like eating Lucky Charms for dinner while drinking red wine and thinking that this was like super sophisticated. Like, this is how it's done. I mean, let's do mac and cheese.
I'm an adult
and
now.
Red wine. Yeah, it was crazy. But I also used it to manage my anxiety. And it was problematic, meaning that in my early 20s, I would drink and I would throw up multiple times throughout the evening. And I even joked to my mother about it one time about, oh God, last night I was throwing up. I felt terrible, blah, blah, blah. And she was like, honey, maybe you need to reevaluate your relationship with alcohol. Mm-hmm. And it became like a punchline in my life and my family. Like, it was the line I brought out all the time, which is funny because now I'm
but never took it seriously.
Never
initially.
took it seriously.
Yeah, like it was more like used as a joke. Well, you said
total joke.
Yeah.
I thought it was so funny.
Yeah.
And what's funny now is I stopped drinking at the age of 40, and now I help women reevaluate their relationship with alcohol.
Yeah.
So my drinking just sort of evolved basically based on my life stage. So then I became a mom, and I dove pretty heavily into the mommy wine culture because before I had kids, I had a lot more options for self-care and for balancing my life and my stress. And once I had my son, I would go to work, stay till the last minute I could, come home, try to get him at daycare before daycare closed. And then, you start the second shift. And motherhood is amazing, and it is draining, and it is monotonous and hard. And so I thought that the mommy wine culture was fantastic. And then I saw a story in the New York Times that said mommy wine blogger gets sober. And it was about her. And my son was 6 months old. And I was like down getting coffee at the morning at my office. And I was like, ooh, like I bought the paper. I hid it away. I pulled up the article. I knew this was not good for me. And so I went for a long time, as I think a lot of women do, trying to control your drinking, making all the rules, trying to moderate, trying to pull it together. At the same time, terrified that anyone would know, including my husband, that I was worried about my own alcohol consumption because I didn't want him watching me. And I honestly did not want to stop drinking. It was my worst case scenario. And so I would walk into work. I was a director at a Fortune 500 company and being like, do I just abuse alcohol or do I have a serious problem? Because if I just abuse it, I can just abuse it less. And then, it'll all be okay. And then I started my sober curious journey, and it looked different at the time. I think, so I've been sober almost 10 years, 9.5 years. I first stopped 13 years ago when my son was 5 years old. And at the time, there was not much out there. I joined an online sober group. A woman there who I liked, who was awesome, who was 4 months sober, lived in Seattle, invited me to go to an AA meeting. I went with her. I was sort of like, well, bucket list, never thought I'd do this in my life. And I went for about 4 months. And the people there were very, very nice, but it wasn't my jam. And it didn't really resonate with my worldviews or how I wanted to envision alcohol-free life. And so, as many people do, I went back to drinking. And they always say that like recovery, and that word is not my favorite as well, but recovery ruins you for drinking. At that point, I knew too much. Like I knew because I'd stopped.
Like you couldn't go back and enjoy it because now you're feeling guilty and like you shouldn't be doing it.
Oh my gosh. I mean, honestly, it was ridiculous. And I had stopped drinking for a year because I got pregnant and my daughter was born. I knew that my anxiety was caused by alcohol. I knew that feeling less happy was caused by alcohol. I knew how good I felt on a Saturday morning when I didn't have a hangover. And I knew every time I woke up at 3 a.m. with just this crushing anxiety that it was my drinking. And once you know that, the first time I stopped, I thought it was situational, right? Like my boss, my life, my husband, I have little kids, my people need to help me more. I'm overwhelmed.
Meaning you thought all those things were causing anxiety and alcohol was helping it.
Yes.
But the second time you were like, oh no, wait, now I know it's actually the alcohol that was causing it or exacerbating all of those problems. And I can't pretend that I don't know that anymore.
Exactly it.
Yeah.
That I knew too much. I had that period of time not drinking. And, the first time I went to a therapist, as one does, which is fantastic. I specifically chose someone who specialized in anxiety and addiction because I kind of thought this was going to be an issue. And I went into him and I said, my life, my boss, my job, my kid. And by the way, I drink a bottle of wine a night. And he was like, let's talk about your drinking. And I was like, no, let's talk about my boss.
Yeah.
And so the second time I was like, I knew what the problem was. And it was just this constant cycle of, I need to stop. I don't want to stop. Alcohol is the problem.
You were ambivalent.
Control it better. Yeah.
Right. And it makes sense you were ambivalent. I mean, I think that's what gets in so many people's way is because alcohol does have benefits in the short term. It works or we wouldn't do it. I mean, hence I'm not sure I want to give it up, right? So ambivalent, I feel two ways about things. I really, really like this substance that makes me feel good and feels like a friend, but also it's causing all of these problems that maybe I shouldn't. And I want to ask you too about your story. Were you also the person who was getting up when you needed to and going to work every day and functioning and being very successful and wouldn't have a drink until 4, 5, 6 o'clock at night and then do it all the next day? Because I think that's the other sticky point for people is, well, as long as I'm doing that, then I'm fine. Because I don't know if it happened culturally. We get this idea that unless you've hit rock bottom and you've lost all your relationships and you can't get out of bed and that that's what an alcoholic looks like. And otherwise you're fine. It's just a glass or two of wine a night. Or we even heard for a long time that a glass of wine a night was good for your health, which we now know it's not true, but that was the messaging for a long time. So it's like on the one hand, maybe this isn't so great, but on the other, do I really need to not do this anymore?
No, I, for the longest time, literally thought that I had anxiety and insomnia. That's why I woke up at 3 a.m. So I was oblivious. I actually didn't know that it was the alcohol that was causing waking up at 3 a.m. in a panic and being unable to fall back to sleep. And I had everything together. I was type A. I was extraordinarily organized. I always went to work with a big smile on my face. I kept getting promoted. I would drink a bottle of wine and wake up and go to a 5:30 boot camp class 5 days a week.
And then what an easy way to say, well, obviously I don't have a problem if I'm still getting up at the crack of dawn and exercising.
Oh my God. And there is nothing worse than doing burpees with a hangover. And I did it on the regular. It was, but nobody would say that I had a problem with alcohol. Now they all knew I loved my wine, right?
Right.
But no one told me to stop. No one told me they were worried about my drinking. My husband never really said anything to me. I mean, occasionally he'd give me the raised eyebrow when I was opening a second bottle of wine on a Tuesday night. I'd be like, I just need one more. But I didn't tell him anything about what was going on in my mind and the struggle. And I think this is true for so many women. Drinkers hang out with other drinkers. And so all of my friends drank. My husband was my drinking buddy. We went for every anniversary to the wine country. We went to Italy and drank carafes in the sunshine. It was tied to my identity, to my friendships, to my marriage, to everything I thought about myself. And I had all these limiting beliefs and fears about life without alcohol. You mentioned them. I'd be bored. I'd be boring. I even thought that I wouldn't get promoted at work if I didn't drink, which is hysterical because I was
because it was such a drinking culture?
Because you had the, drinks out on your business
client
trip.
Dinners.
The client dinners. And if I stopped drinking, they would think I had a problem as opposed to me, getting blitzed at a happy hour. Then that's okay. And that's our society, right? You get questioned if you stop drinking an addictive substance that literally is a depressant plus a stimulant. It affects your nervous system. It shuts off your brain.
You did an amazing episode on your podcast, Hello Someday, with Anna Lemke. And we actually had her on Psychologist Off the Clock back episode 233. So it was a while ago now. And so it had been a while since I had heard her talk, and listening to her talk to you about all of the ways in which alcohol affects us with our neurotransmitters, just the science of it, I was like, oh my gosh. So I really recommend anyone who is sober curious, go check out Casey's podcast. And that episode specifically, I shared it with a friend, and there's so much good stuff in there, some of which I knew, some of which I knew but forgot, and a lot of which I didn't know. Like thing that comes to mind is that it can take 30 full days before alcohol is like really actually totally out of your system. And I did not know that at all, because I would if I was just drinking weekends, so I wouldn't drink Sunday, and by Tuesday, I'm like sleeping through the night again and really noticing, wow, when I don't drink, I feel so much better, but not recognizing like that's just kind of the tip of the iceberg, because really you're basically spending the week still withdrawing from the alcohol, then drinking again on the weekend, then withdrawing during the week. And so it was really helpful to listen to her talk about the science and the physiology behind that.
Yeah. And I think what's interesting that people don't know is that what alcohol does is it spikes your dopamine really high, in the same way that like sugar will spike your dopamine a little and cocaine and meth will spike your dopamine off the charts. Alcohol really spikes your dopamine. And so what happens is your body wants to maintain an equal level. So what it will do is your body will suppress your natural level of dopamine. That's what Anna talks about. And that is your happy hormone. That is literally what makes you feel joy. And so when you are drinking, we think that it makes us happier. And it's because your natural level of dopamine is suppressed and you get that boost from when you drink. So it's counterintuitive, but if you go 30 days, because that's what Anna talks about it, she recommends a 30-day dopamine fast, you will feel happier and more content and actually more emotionally stable, because it also messes with your serotonin and it spikes your cortisol, which is your stress hormone. So mood regulation, stress and anxiety, and overall contentment and happiness are made worse by alcohol, but you will never see that unless you take a 30-day break. And it's kind of amazing. When I stopped drinking, I remember walking into work one Tuesday, and it was, 8:30 in the morning, and it was March. I mean, not the best time of the year in Seattle, but the birds were flying. And I walked in, and I felt this overwhelming joy. And I thought to myself, I love my life, which when I was drinking, literally would wake up and be like, what is wrong with me? Get your life together. This is too hard. Resentment, irritation, not wanting to go to work in the morning. And just that like joy was incredible.
And that was around that 30-day mark that you noticed it?
One more small thing I just wanted to mention, because we also think that drinking will help us sleep. I just need to calm down. So alcohol is really interesting in that it's a depressant and a stimulant, right? So it does all the things to your body, but it does help you pass out, right? It slows down your body. However, studies show that for women who consume one drink, their sleep quality decreased by 24%. And if they have 2 glasses, their sleep quality is decreased 39%.
Wow.
And what that means is you don't drop into REM sleep. You're waking up in the middle of the night. You're not getting rest. So when I stopped drinking, I probably had not had a really good night of sleep in 2 years, because my daughter was 2 years old when I quit.
Yeah, passing out is not sleeping. And the other thing too is I don't know exactly the biology behind it, but there's something that happens with some enzyme, something that you drink the alcohol in the evening, it processes, and the second it's done like working its way through your liver, it automatically wakes you up. So like no matter what, you're waking up at 2 o'clock in the morning or 3 o'clock in the morning. And I mean, that's just a given, right? And then if you're also a person who has some anxiety, and if you've been drinking because you have anxiety, then you're probably not going to fall back to sleep, because now you're up and the wheels are spinning. So it's sort of a mess of things that happen, even if it's just one or two.
Yeah. And I have to say that when I was drinking, all this information would not have stopped me. It would not have been enough to be like, oh, it messes with my sleep and it's seen as a toxin, so it will stop weight loss because your body wants to expel, this ethanol, which is the same as gasoline. That's what alcohol is.
Yeah.
And it increases your anxiety. That information would not have been enough to get me to stop drinking. And I think the other part of it is this societal belief that's been ingrained in us since birth that alcohol is to be celebrated, that it's a privilege of adulthood, that it's what helps us connect. It's the signal that the night is going to be a good time. And that if we don't consume it in quote unquote responsibly, there is something wrong with us, not something wrong with the substance. Mm-hmm. And shifting those beliefs are harder, but also more powerful than knowing that alcohol hurts your sleep.
Yeah. It's a good point because I've known all of those things for a very long time. And I mean, I've been thinking about this at some level here or there, probably over the past 4 or 5 years. Because like I said, it was like COVID where I started to drink a little bit more. Actually, you know what? I take that back. I would say I used to only be like a social weekend drinker. And then I would say similar to what you were saying is like after I had my first kid, life felt a lot more stressful being a parent. So I started to drink a little more. Then I had my second kid and he was a very difficult child to parent. Thankfully, he's gotten a lot easier, but it was real challenging in those early years. And I started to drink a little more. And then with COVID, it was more noticeable. And so even like being aware of that and like I said, moderating, like it going up and down and having all the information, it didn't really become a more serious consideration for me until, I don't know, maybe like the last 6 months. And I was going to ask you like, well, what was it? If it wasn't knowing it hurts your sleep, like what was it? And I'm trying to think about how to answer that question for myself. And I think for me, it's just an accumulation of all the things over time. And I just wasn't ready yet, but stars have aligned. And I think the thing that really probably tipped me over most recently is now that my kids are older, I felt like I could kind of like get away with it and they wouldn't notice when they were younger. Whereas now I feel like I'm really being a poor role model. They're 11 and 13. Like this is absolutely when they're going to be hyper aware of what their parents are doing. And my own mom had a very similar pattern where she was super fun and social, but over time her drinking increased exponentially to a point where it did become quite obviously problematic. And I just had this awareness of A, I don't ever want to be there. And B, I know how I felt as the child of that person. And I never wanted my kids to even be worrying about whether I have a problem, if that makes sense. Was there anything for you that kind of like was the final straw?
That's interesting. I think it's helpful to say that there wasn't any rock bottom. Yeah. I never got a DUI. Literally no one ever told me you need to stop drinking. Nobody, including my husband. That said, for me, it was the death of 1,000 cuts, where every time I woke up with a hangover, I was like, yikes, I knew. Every time I told myself I would take a break, but then 4 days later was like, it's been a hard day, a good day, a stressful day. Let me buy a bottle of wine. Every time I told myself I'd have 2 glasses of wine and no more, and either I threw it out the window and had more, or I was super irritated and resentful and annoyed when I wasn't drinking. I mean, I used to drive home, like I said, to pick up my son at daycare, which is hard, right? When you have a big job and you're traveling and, you have to get there right at 6:30 and your boss doesn't have kids or has a spouse who does that.
Right.
And I would be debating in my mind, do I have enough wine at home? And do I have time to stop to grab a bottle before daycare closes? Like it had just become too important to me.
Like it was taking up too much real estate in your brain.
All the real estate. And then you have that like shame or worry.
Yeah. I want to go back to the thing you were saying, like no one ever told me I had a problem, even my husband. Same with me. And when I know you had this similar experience, when I told my husband I was doing this, he was bummed. Like he's still giving me a hard time. I was watching TV over the weekend and I had a wine glass with red liquid in it. And all of a sudden he goes, "Ooh, what you got there?"
Oh,
Like
no.
he was like excited that I had changed my mind and decided to have a glass of wine. I was like, "Oh, it's non-alcoholic wine." And he went, and he teases me. He's like, "Nobody likes a quitter, Jill." You know? And by the way, that non-alcoholic red wine was terrible. I had to throw it away. But I drink a non-alcoholic beer. Like most nights, I'll have one non-alcoholic beer and I love it. And I feel like I'm still having my nice, yummy, cold beer and it's way fewer calories and I just have one. But let's talk about like, what are all the things that get in the way? If you're not a rock bottom alcoholic, but you kind of maybe aren't comfortable, all the things you fear. We talked about, I'll be bored, I'll be boring, people won't like me, they won't invite me to social things. I'm having this issue with like my husband because he doesn't see this as a problem. So he doesn't understand why I would do this. And he's afraid I'm not going to be fun.
Yeah.
So like what are there your experience or your clients, because you work as a sobriety coach and have for a while now, what would you say are the biggest like mindset shifts that need to happen in terms of like the obstacles that get in the way of people like finally taking this lead?
Yeah. Thank you for asking that, because your experience is not unique. And as you mentioned, like my husband was not thrilled that I stopped drinking either. I was very lucky that I found support elsewhere, that I had this community of other cool women who were also on the same path, that I hired a sober coach and I worked with her and she helped me do, really the block and tackling of like, I'm going to a happy hour. What do I say? What do I order? What do I do? I want to drink. How do I de-stress? I had a terrible day. My husband, implied X. What do I do? Here's what I say to women. I love the idea of picking a specific amount of time that you are not going to drink. And so you're doing sober summer, which is right around what I recommend. I recommend 100 days. And we can talk about that because 30 days is what most people do. And it's not enough. I know you don't want to hear that, but at 30 days, you were just starting to feel better. Dopamine is just resetting. And if you do, a lot of people do 30 days, dry January, sober October, dry July, to prove to themselves that they don't have a problem. Like if I can stop for 30 days, there's nothing to see here. Or, hey, I didn't drink during pregnancy, so there's nothing to see here. I mean, I never drank during pregnancy, except at third trimester when they told you could have half a glass once a week. But, it's not enough time, because part of this is rewiring your reward system. Like my universe of rewards had shrunk to a glass of wine at the end of the night because I was busy and my life was stressful and my to-do list was long, or a date night or a girls' night or a vacation, all of which centered around alcohol.
Yeah.
And it's work to take that off the table and to be like, what do I need on a Friday night? What would feel good? Instead, I had to be like, okay, let me get a pedicure and take out sushi and cuddle up and watch a rom-com. That's hard.
Well, and I imagine that anyone like, okay, so if I'm just going to do 30 days and I'm going to white knuckle my way through it to prove that I can, I'm going to just not go out to dinner and not go to happy hours. But if you're going to do 100 days or longer, you have to figure out how to live a normal life without alcohol. It's easy,
and how to enjoy it.
To just have a small life for 30 days and then go back to everything being the same. But the longer you challenge yourself, the more it really forces you to figure out, like, how can I still go be out in a world that often totally revolves around alcohol and like just do it anyway.
Here's the good thing. Like, I think that setting a limited amount of time, but that is longer than 30 days, does a couple things. One, it lets you frame it as a health challenge or a health and wellness move, which, by the way, it is. Like, if you stop drinking, you will feel happier, more emotionally stable. You will sleep better. You will have less anxiety. By the way, nobody wants to hear this. This wouldn't have stopped me, but alcohol does cause cancer. And the cancer risk equivalent of a bottle of wine is the same as smoking 10 cigarettes, which I did not know. And when you think about, like, would I pick up 10 cigarettes either in a week or in a night? That's insane. The studies have shown that women who drink 3 glasses of wine a week have a 15% increased risk of breast cancer versus women who don't. And for every glass on top of it, it raises your risk another 10%.
Yeah. So anyone who's drinking a bottle, 2 bottles a weekend or a couple glasses every night, that's a very high number.
But you get to frame it as a health and wellness choice, right? So I told everyone I'm doing an alcohol-free challenge, by the way, including my husband. So I will sleep better and have more energy and have less anxiety. That was it. That's what I told everyone. And I told everyone. I told my work colleagues, my 5:30 a.m. workout group, my girlfriends, my husband, the moms at Little League, because I needed that accountability. Yeah. And everyone knew I drank. My whole social life was surrounded by it. So that was helpful.
So wait, if you had just not drank and didn't tell anyone, they'd be like, are you pregnant?
Oh my God.
Are you okay? Right? Like you couldn't do it without telling them. I will admit that when I made the decision, at first I didn't tell anyone because I was afraid I would fail. And then people would really think I had a problem, right? You were saying how people don't want to tell that they're stopping drinking because they'll assume it's because you have a problem or you're an alcoholic. Yeah. But like, what if I say I'm going to stop and then I don't commit? Like I fail at it. Like, so at first I didn't tell anyone because I was like worried about that. And then I was like, no, wait a minute. That's exactly the wrong thing to do because you're giving yourself an out. Mm-hmm. And okay, so if you fail, you fail. That's a data point. Like that's actually information that you really need to have because it means you need to do something differently to be able to stick to it. Yes. And if you tell people, then not only is there accountability, but you can get support. Like if it's Friday night and I'm bored and it's hot out and I really could go for a glass of white wine, like I can reach out to someone and talk to them instead of white knuckling it or picking up the glass of wine. And of course, once I started doing it, all the things I was afraid of didn't happen. They weren't judging me. They weren't like, oh, are you all right? It was more like, oh, wow, I could never do that. Good for you. Right. Like everybody was like proud of me and happy for me and was like, wow, that's really hard. I don't think I could ever do that. And that actually made me feel less alone. So even though I'm not drinking, but they are, I felt less alone by the way they responded when I told them I wasn't drinking. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And what I would say about your husband, and I want to send you this, it's also in my program. I have a partner playbook. And it is literally something that you can either take talking points from or you can hand over to your partner when you decide to do an alcohol-free challenge. And it goes through all the fears your spouse may have, but it also frames it in a really positive, approachable, non-judgmental thing. Like it is scary for them too, because they're like, will we ever have sex again? Is she judging me? When we drink, that's when we bond. That's when we have the conversations. They have a lot of fears about what it will mean for them, including, does this mean I can't drink? Because everyone's really possessive over their drug of choice.
Sure.
When I think about friends, and this is something to think about with your spouse, say you decided to become a vegetarian. Same thing. It is a health and lifestyle choice. It is a personal decision. What if you went out to dinner with your girlfriend and said, oh, I'm, decided to be a vegetarian or I'm a vegetarian? How terrible of a friend would they be if they were like, come on, just have a bite of burger. How long are you going to do this vegetarian? I would sit there and be like, why do you care?
Yeah.
Why is it so important to you?
And they also wouldn't say, do you mind if I eat meat in front of you? Or, I mean, they might, but like, that's not a thing.
And that's strategies, right? Like you go to a dinner party, you're a vegetarian or you're a vegan, and you don't assume that they will have all the food that you have. So either you pick around what's being served and you choose something that works for you, or you bring your own side dish or you bring your own whatever, right? So I go to parties and I go over to people's houses and I recommend them to the women in my group, like bring your own alt bevs, bring your own non-alcoholic wine. There is fantastic non-alcoholic sparkling white wine, brut, you name it. But with your spouse, the reason I have the partner guide is because it is very personal and close to home when your spouse decides to stop drinking. They don't understand it. My husband just wanted me to just have 2 glasses or just drink on Friday night. And the thing is, like, if you love to drink, it's like, oh, I never thought about that. Like I've been trying for years to do that.
Well, and I think for me, it was like, I actually feel quite confident that I could do that, but I don't want to. I mean, especially after listening to The Naked Mind and the Anna Lemke episode, it's like once you see it, you can't unsee it.
Yeah.
And if I now know how damaging this beverage is, it's a beverage. Like, why do we give it so much power? So like, even if I can just go out and have a glass or two of wine on a Friday night date night, I just don't want to anymore now that I know how damaging it is and that I won't sleep. And that, of course, the older you get, it only takes one glass to feel like crap in the morning. It's not like college where you could drink 6 and barely be hungover the next day. Like, would I keep choosing to put this like gasoline toxic substance in me? And especially if it's just to make someone else comfortable. Like, I just don't want to do that anymore. Can I? Probably. Do I want to? No.
And also, it's just the idea of like, I really encourage women, approach this with curiosity and excitement. Approach this as a self-care period of time where you truly meet your needs. So we drink because we're stressed out, or because we're overwhelmed, or because our spouse is pissing us off, or because our kids are tough, or our boss is a nightmare, or because we want to celebrate, or whatever it is, you're bored. So we've stopped problem solving for those emotions, right? It's like happy drink, sad drink, angry drink, bored drink. And so just sitting there and being like, okay, why do I want to drink? What emotion am I feeling? How else could I solve for that? Like, let me go for a walk. Let me call up a girlfriend. Let me get a massage. Let me hire a babysitter so I can be an adult again. But that doesn't mean going to a bar.
Or even just sit with it and have an experience of like, this is uncomfortable. I give my clients this mantra, this 5-part mantra, and I tell in all of my like talks and stuff that I do, we'll do like a little exercise of like getting uncomfortable on purpose. And then this little mantra that is, this is uncomfortable, but it is just a feeling. It is not dangerous. It is temporary, and I can handle it. And it's like saying that over and over until you get to a point where you start to change your relationship to discomfort and you get better at being comfortable being uncomfortable. And I think our whole entire lives would change if we could all be willing to be uncomfortable. Like, think of how many choices we make because we don't want to feel a certain feeling.
Yeah.
And one of the ways we do that is to drink. You know, people have all sorts of different ways they avoid their internal experiences. And if we were all able to just be with our feelings and recognize that they're temporary and not dangerous, and it's really just uncomfortable and you'll be okay, then like it really opens up all the things that you can do or not do if that's not driving your behavior anymore.
Well, and for example, when you came on about talking about imposter syndrome, a lot of women drink because they feel like an imposter, or they worry they won't be enough, or they're afraid of failing or whatever. It's a social lubricant. It's a way to think less. And obviously in your book, you're not like, oh, you're feeling these emotions, go drink.
You should drink.
That's a good way to get over. No.
Here's one solution. Have a bottle of wine. Then you won't be worried about being outed as a fraud. No, that's definitely not in my book. The other thing that I think is really important and powerful, and that I've already had happen experientially, we make a lot of predictions and assumptions about how things are going to be. And this is why the husbands are worried about how this is going to be. They're assuming things are going to change, you're going to be different, and it's going to be bad in some way. It is why maybe we choose not to stop drinking when we're ambivalent. I'm afraid it's going to be awkward and boring and terrible and people will judge me. So just in the last 2 weeks, I have gone to a number of social events where, of course, I assumed there would be drinking because there's always drinking. It's in the evening. And I brought my own non-alcoholic stuff to one of these events and thought I was going to be the only one. And it was the first time I actually bothered to observe and was like, oh, there's actually only like 2 people here who are drinking wine. Everyone else is drinking non-alcoholic stuff. Isn't that interesting? So like I'm starting to get data that doesn't support my assumptions. Then I went to another event, couldn't bring my own thing, but didn't drink. It was fine. And a couple people were drinking there. And these are like, badass women who are super smart that I really respect, and having a glass of wine at the end of an event. And we're chatting. And I was like, oh, you're actually less like charming and bright and sharp and awesome when you're drinking, not more. And like, if I'm drinking, I assume I'm like the life of the party and I'm so charming. But now I'm like seeing it through this different perspective. And I'm like, oh, wait, that assumption is wrong too. Right. And so it's like, until I went and tested it out experientially, I couldn't debunk like all of those assumptions and predictions that I was making in my own head. And I am quite confident that given a few more weeks, the same thing's going to happen with my husband, where he's like, oh, you're still you, you're still fun, we're still good. And then it's not going to be a thing anymore. Did that happen for you and your husband?
Yeah, it was interesting because I was very worried about being boring or being bored. And about 30 days in, I said, hey, babe, I'm my 30-day mark, not drinking, awesome, huh? And then I said, is there anything you've noticed? And he said, I don't know what I expected him to say, but he said, our home is just a lot more peaceful. You're less up and down. Like things set you off less, like your boss or the day at work or the traffic or the commute. You're just more even. And in the mornings, I used to be really stressed, probably because I hadn't slept well. And I was irritated and I didn't want to look him in the eye too closely. Like I hated looking at my watery eyes. I was sort of like heads down. I'm so busy. I got to get the coffee. I got out at the door. And he's like, you wake up in the morning and you're calmer. Your things are lower. They just feel better.
Well, probably because you feel proud and you don't hate yourself.
Yeah. And you're not constantly running on adrenaline.
Right.
Yeah. And so that was nice. And I think for some women, it helps to reframe bored as peaceful because we're not used to being at peace. A lot of us aren't comfortable just sitting with ourselves. Either we think our productivity is some measure of our worth, and therefore we should be doing things all the time, that we're lazy if we just sit and be and decompress, or we don't want to sit with ourselves because our mind's racing about what we haven't done or what we're anxious about or what might happen. Yeah. So it's not boring, it's peaceful.
Yeah, I love that. Let's talk about the term alcoholic. Tell people why you take issue with this term alcoholic and like why AA doesn't speak to everyone.
Yeah, I mean, here's what I would say. Any label that helps you achieve your goal, you should use. Right? So for some people, calling themselves an alcoholic is powerful. It helps them identify with a group and it helps take drinking completely off the table. It also is really closely tied with the Alcoholics Anonymous program, which is one path to stop drinking. It's one path of a framework and social support and a belief system that focuses on abstinence. It is not the only one.
And for like the people for whom it's a good fit and it works, it's fabulous, but it's not for everyone.
Yeah. And I have a ton of friends who adore the program, who got sober with the program, who think it's fantastic. And I attended and I loved the people I met there. That said, I didn't want to call myself an alcoholic. I didn't love that term. The framework of Alcoholics Anonymous is around the idea of the big book, which is so helpful to so many people. In my mind, it was also written by two white Christian men 80 plus years ago. It didn't resonate with me. And so I needed to look elsewhere. So just so everyone knows, there is no diagnosis of being an alcoholic. In the DSM, the term is alcohol use disorder. It's a spectrum. It's a spectrum of mild to moderate to severe. So there is no medical diagnosis of being an alcoholic. So that term is really culturally created and used by people who think it's fantastic and powerful and gives them a sense of community, and by a lot of people who use it as a way, I think, to separate themselves from, quote unquote, those people who can't drink. And I think that big alcohol companies, beer companies, hard liquor companies love the term alcoholic.
Right. Because if you're not falling down and ruining your life, then you're fine to drink.
Then there's nothing.
Right? You're not an alcoholic, so you're fine to drink.
Yeah.
And we'll sell more booze. Yeah.
Absolutely. And they also, the idea is that the term alcoholic somehow puts the issue with the person.
Right.
You know, most people, quote unquote, can drink responsibly. Those people shouldn't drink over there, the alcoholics. And the truth is,
the problem isn't with the substance.
It's
with very
the substance.
addictive. It's that you have this type of personality that means
Yes.
you have some moral failing that you weren't able to control it.
Yeah.
Versus it is a substance that is designed to not be controllable over time, given enough time.
Absolutely. I mean, people who start smoking cigarettes don't smoke a pack a day in the beginning. Alcohol works the exact same way, whether it's mild, moderate, or severe. That's the way the substance works. So for me, what I say is I used to drink a lot. I loved it. I quit and I'm happier. Like that is my story. Mm-hmm. And it's completely and totally true. I call myself sober because I'm a sober coach. In the beginning, I didn't love the word sober. I didn't love the word recovery.
Just I don't drink.
Yeah. I don't drink. I'm alcohol free. And I think now it's much easier with the whole sober curious movement. By the way, younger generations like Gen Z drinks less than their parents or grandparents, like 30% less.
Wow.
And there are a bunch of different factors in there. But a lot of us grew up with the idea of the French paradox and all these studies that said that red wine was good for the heart. And some of those studies are so flawed and have been disproven a million times. And so I think that the younger generations are much more aware of what it does to your mental health.
We actually had Jess Leahy on the podcast. That's episode 202. She came on to talk about her book, The Addiction Inoculation. And she talks about all those studies. Like what made me think of it is you were talking about this French paradox. It's like, oh, in Europe, they start drinking young. And because they're allowed to drink at any age, they don't actually have substance use problems. And that's completely false. So she really debunks a lot of these myths and she does it with science and research. So that's a good one too.
Yeah, I love her. I talked to her too. And she is incredible. The entire book has awesome data and it's also focusing on how you can help your kids get out of the trap of addiction or work
the
with them.
Subtitle is Raising Healthy Kids in a Culture of Dependence. So you're exactly right. And this was on my mind when I told you earlier, like for me, the thing that finally made me decide to stop was really around this value of what I'm modeling to my kids. And I had her book in the back of my head that, you know, that kids are more likely to drink when they grow up with parents who drink. Or one that really surprised me too is kids whose parents let them have a sip of their alcohol when they're, you know, younger than 21 are more likely to develop problematic drinking behavior. So I had not let my kids ever try alcohol, but I probably would have if I hadn't read that book.
And it's not even a sip. Like a lot of parents say, oh, well, I'll let them drink at home. At least then I know that they're being safe or whatever it is. Yep. And that actually, you know, statistically shows that people who had that or started drinking at younger ages are more likely to struggle with addiction. Yep. The other thing I would say that is interesting with the younger generation is their reliance on social media. And there are also studies done that the younger generations are very aware that one video, one picture, one whatever it is could really negatively impact their future prospects in their lives. And also they are much more aware of the role alcohol plays in sexual assault. Both men and women around consent and around their ability to effectively understand and be aware of it. And so I think the mental health aspect, the worry about things getting out that you do not want to get out and getting broadcast, so they really want to be in control, and the information around sexual assault and the way alcohol plays into that is really helping them be more mindful. They also know about the cancer risk, which, by the way, the American Cancer Society didn't change their guidelines from 7 drinks a week for women, 14 to men, as recommended, to 0 in terms of cancer risk until like 5 years ago, which is insane because they have had that information for a decade. But I think lobbyists and policymakers, and, you know, there is a lot of money around alcohol. So there are also separate conversation, marijuana, legalization. There's also other reasons why younger generations aren't drinking as much, but those are big ones.
And I think like we all need to stop and ask ourselves, who benefits from this message?
Yeah.
Right? Like the messaging that alcohol is awesome and fun and social. Who benefits from that? Not you.
Yeah.
You're not the one making money off people spending billions on alcohol. The message is that women should be skinny. Like, who benefits from that? Right?
Yeah.
It's like we really need to stop and question all of the cultural messaging, because chances are it boils down to someone else's bottom line. It is just how people make money off of your pain, suffering, vulnerabilities, etc. And I feel like that can really be an act of resistance, to like be like, I've been talking to my 13-year-old daughter about like the role of patriarchy. It's like, if you're going to diet, you're basically like giving in to the patriarchy by deciding you're going to go on a diet, and like talking about it from that point of view.
My gosh, I have so many thoughts on this. And like you, I've done a million episodes. And some of the ones that are the most interesting is the way the alcohol industry decided very consciously to target women and to target young mothers as well. And it was because they needed to expand their base of who was drinking what, and how often they were drinking it. So they specifically, hired mommy influencers, and different brands went trying to target women. I mean, the whole, I used to work in marketing. We did so many, focus groups and tests and messaging and choosing your models. I mean, it is very deliberate. And there are bottles of wine out there called Mommy Timeout. Like literally there is a brand called, what about Skinny Girl Vodka? I mean, there is so much out there.
And Virginia Slims did it back in the 50s or 60s, right? Ooh, we need to get more lady smokers.
Yes.
So we can make more money.
Tying that to being badass, being modern, being independent, tying alcohol somewhat to a screw you to the patriarchy. They've done that, right?
Yeah.
A modern, empowered
feminist
woman drinks X, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's really interesting because for the last 5-7 years, there's been this undercurrent of, will alcohol have their tobacco moment? Meaning, are people going to question, based on the health and wellness and data around the negative impacts of alcohol, question whether or not we should be consuming this substance? And the alcohol industry is really, like, if I read the data, I read the wine industry stuff, they are very scared about what is happening right now. And specifically, the alcohol companies are having to create non-alcoholic versions of their products because the demand is there. And if not, they are losing. So, there is non-alcoholic Corona, there's non-alcoholic Heineken, there's non-alcoholic Guinness. I mean, that's great news for those of us who want to be alcohol free. But I just saw an article that was all about how the alcohol companies are trying to question the studies that alcohol causes cancer, and the studies that are showing that alcohol is not good for you, because it is taking a huge chunk out of their bottom line. And they're pushing back with all the marketing around non-alcoholic stuff. So it's very interesting. I mean, the wine producers in France and Italy had a complete meltdown when Ireland passed a law that said that every individual alcohol can or bottle, every bottle of wine had to have information about, like, this causes cancer, this leads to liver disease. Because the only thing on wine here is drink responsibly.
For pregnant woman.
Don't operate machinery. Don't drink when pregnant. Like, otherwise, nothing to see here.
Otherwise, you're all good. Yeah. What do you think about non-alcoholic beverages? So I've asked you this offline, but I want our listeners to hear, because I assumed, as a psychologist, I've been around a lot of like alcohol and drug treatment programs and whatnot. And my assumption was that people in that part of the field would say, no, this is a terrible idea because it's going to trigger you to want to drink real alcohol. So like, what are your thoughts about non-alcoholic beverages being good, bad, little bit of each? It depends. What do you think?
I mean, personally, I love them. I am a big fan of keep the ritual, change the ingredients, right? So I go out camping, I go to my fire pit, my favorite is Athletic, non-alcoholic beer. I mean, it is the biggest non-alcoholic brand out there, and it is really good. It literally has 0.5% alcohol, which is the same in ripe bananas and bread and all this kind of stuff. There is also 0.0 if that is important to you. Now, I think that if you are triggered, meaning if drinking a non-alcoholic beer or non-alcoholic cocktail makes you want to drink or hits too close to home, don't do it. You don't need it. You can drink sparkling water. You can drink anything out there. When I first stopped drinking, I would tell my husband when we went to the burger place or wherever with our little kids, like, if you get there before me, order me a chocolate milkshake. Because he always used to order me wine. And my kids were 8 and 2, and they were like, Mom's the coolest. She's having a chocolate milkshake, right? I was always like, I'll have wine, but no dessert for me.
Right.
But if it doesn't trigger you, it is a fantastic substitute. You get the taste, which for a lot of us brings back a lot of memories. And you also fit in, but you don't need it. I just enjoy it.
Yeah, same. Yeah, same. Part of my ritual would be to have a glass of wine while I'm cooking. Yeah. And I hate cooking. So it's like this chore that I feel like I have to do. So I'm like, well, at least I get to enjoy a glass of wine while I'm cooking, right? And now that I'm not drinking, I haven't found a nice non-alcoholic wine I like yet. So I have the 1 pint of the Athletic IPA or Hazy IPA, and it has the same taste, and it feels like it's still a treat and part of the ritual. It's way fewer calories, which is nice. They're still kind of expensive, but less expensive than alcoholic drinks are. And it's like, it just scratches that itch and then I'm done, you know?
Well, and part of that idea of questioning your spouse's reaction or friend's reaction, it's like, I'm drinking a non-alcoholic beer. You're drinking an alcoholic beer. Why do you care?
Right.
Why? Why does it matter to you? Because you can go to almost any restaurant and find mocktails, zero proof cocktails, non-alcoholic beers, some non-alcoholic wines. So I think it's an interesting question. The metaphor I use a lot, because people get scared about this, is if you decide to run a marathon, and by the way, I've never run a marathon, so don't listen to me, but I have lots of friends who have. Would your spouse have to run a marathon as well? And the answer is no. Yeah. But you would probably do a few things. Number one, your spouse would not give you trouble for going to bed early on a Friday night to wake up Saturday for a long run. Your spouse would probably take the kids if you were running 13 miles so that you could do that because it's a health and wellness choice. Your spouse might pick you up at the end of the run. You might get social support. You might join a Couch to 5K group or a Couch to 10K group. You might buy and download a plan about how to train for a marathon. That is the same as deciding to not drink, right? You probably might need your husband to take on more or your partner to take on more of the childcare so that you have time to decompress without, knocking yourself unconscious or consuming a substance. Your spouse might be really cool and bring you a non-alcoholic beverage for dinner. Your spouse might, you might join a group, a sober curious group. You might join a program to show you the shortcuts to quitting drinking, right? It's just because you decide to run a marathon or stop drinking does not mean your partner has to do it too. It just means they can support you.
That's a great example. And it also made me think of another guest that we've had in common when you said the spouse might have to take on a little bit more so that you have ways to go decompress. Eve Rodsky, who everyone who's been a longtime listener of POTC knows that I am a big fan. And, her fair play system is a perfect way to, have gender equality or fairness in the home and for your partner to take on a little bit more of that responsibility. And then your stress level will go down and your need to drink might actually feel like it dissipates a little bit.
The other thing I want to put in your mind, because you were talking about cooking and it's so applicable, I think a lot of times we will say to ourselves, but this won't be any fun if I don't drink. Or we drink because we're going to the in-laws or we're going to a work function or we're going wherever or cooking. And in my mind, it's like, if it isn't fun, if you don't drink, is it just not fun? We need to edit all the things we say yes to. You're consuming this so you can tolerate something sometimes. Right. And I think as women, we need to get better at boundaries. We need to get better at advocating for ourselves. And honestly, we need to get way better at asking, what is it I want? Not what is it my kids will enjoy? What is it my partner will enjoy? what am I supposed to do or what should I do? So like, it will teach you stopping drinking. One, it's just a beverage swap. But two, it is a whole universe of self-discovery and personal growth around your wants and needs and where you have poor boundaries and what actually brings you joy and what it means, all those stuff.
That's a great point. Let's talk about the benefits. Let's end on like all of the ways in which your life has improved. What is it that you hear from your coaching clients or the women in your support groups? What do people say once they've had 30 days or 100 days?
Yeah, I have so many. Like one of the things I love to do is I've got some guides on celebrating and honoring your 30, 60, and 100-day milestone. And what I love about them is I've got all these quotes and posts from women and what they've told me about what has changed in their lives. So one, women are happier. And I know that sounds weird, but like it is proven, right? 30, 60, 100 days, you will be happier. You will be more emotionally stable. You will be less anxious. You will sleep better. Your face will look better. I mean, I always encourage women, if you're going to take a break from drinking, take a selfie on day one, meaning which a lot of us are hungover when we do that. And then do it weekly because you will notice the change in your skin, your eyes, and the bloating on your face very quickly. And even if you don't lose a single pound in your first 30 days, you will look differently. You will be less bloated. So if you are doing this just for vanity reasons, go ahead and do it, right? Like not drinking is the best anti-aging thing you can possibly do. But also they find new coping mechanisms. They have more time for hobbies. They have more time to take care of themselves. And honestly, like I thought that drinking made me a better parent because, hey, I could have a glass of wine while doing Legos or Candyland, or it made me happy and buzzy. It is way easier to parent a toddler when you are not extra anxious or extra depressed or extra stressed, when you've slept
irritable.
Well. Yeah, you're irritable. I mean, so get through the first 3 weeks and you will be a more patient parent. You will take better care of yourself. You will be more emotionally stable. You will save a lot of money.
Yeah. That's a big motivator for me right now. Yeah. The money. The other thing for me that's already changed in just 2 weeks is I used to have like I would never sign up for my exercise classes on the weekend, like just in case I'm hungover or I don't fit. Because even if it was just 2 glasses of wine, I still would feel like crap in the morning. And I would never sign up to exercise. And now I like wake up and I wake up at the crack of dawn no matter what. And so I'm up and I'm like bored and I have nothing to do. And I've set these very strict boundaries that I don't work nights and weekends anymore. And I've been doing that for years. So I'm like bored and I'm like, well, I might as well go exercise.
And then you get those natural dopamine hits.
Yes, totally. So and then when I exercise, I tend to like pick less at like food I don't need to be eating. And that's been fabulous.
Yeah. I mean, there's so many benefits that you won't even realize until you take a longer break. The biggest one is just the constant thought process and rationalizations and that cognitive dissonance around should I, shouldn't I, how much will I, should I drink tonight? Do I have enough? Am I okay to drive? I mean, all of that goes away. And you're
just frees up that brain
replaced
space
with more confidence and pride and presence. And it's love. I mean, I'm so proud of you for doing this sober summer. Like it's such a great move. And I'm really excited to see what you discover as you,
me too,
as you move through like the things that shift. I would love for you to like keep notes or keep a journal. Like certainly when you hit 30 days, 50, 60, 100, be like, here's how I felt in the beginning when I was drinking. Here's what's changed. Here are my wins, like the things that I thought would be hard without alcohol, but I did. And then like, here's how I feel at 30 days. Like, and it might just be like, I'm sleeping better. I'm going to my exercise class. My home is more peaceful.
Right.
Like that's a win.
We should do a follow-up episode Labor Day, like around Labor Day.
Let's do it. I would
I
love
did that with Eve. So Eve and I did like a part 1 Fair Play episode. So it was episode 176 was the first time she came on. And then I implemented Fair Play with my husband. And then she came back for episode 206 and we did part 2 where we basically talked about how it's been going. And it was really fun. So we should do that. And we'll do like a How Did Sober Summer
I would
go?
love that. That would be
Okay,
awesome.
let's plan it. That would be awesome. One thing we didn't get to that I'm actually going to point people to your podcast for this is I imagine that most people listening who are toying with this idea of maybe changing the amount they're drinking must be thinking, okay, well, how about if I just reduce? How about if I just decrease, right? That whole moderation thing. And I think many of us have been there, done that, and often ultimately decide to just get rid of it altogether. And you have a fabulous episode. Do you know what episode of Hello Someday that one is?
Yeah, the episode is called Have You Tried to Moderate Your Drinking? And it's episode 263. So you can go to hellosomedaycoaching.com/263 or find it on your podcast player.
Yeah. So you guys have this great conversation on the podcast about like to moderate or not to moderate, kind of the different things to consider when you're thinking about moderating. And I think for a lot of people who ultimately decide to go alcohol free, it's after they've done moderation a number of times. So if people are having that question about, can't I just moderate? Just like our husbands are like, can't you just moderate? I highly recommend, I recommend the podcast in general, but that episode specifically for that question.
Yeah, the one thing I will say about that is if you are trying to only drink on the weekends or trying to only drink 1 glass of wine a night, you are what I call in the drinking cycle. You are constantly in that craving and withdrawal cycle. And you are doing the absolute hardest part over and over and over again.
And can I add in there too that craving doesn't always feel like craving and withdrawal doesn't necessarily feel like withdrawal. What you're talking about is just a physiological process.
Yes.
Right? That like this is what your body is doing, even if you're not feeling this uncontrollable
You may not
urge to
realize
drink, right?
it's happening.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
So
exactly.
and in Dopamine Nation, Anna Lemke talks about it, that withdrawal might just feel like irritation, anxiety, discontent, lethargy. And the craving might just be the thought process like, oh, I really would love a glass of wine tonight. Yeah. Or I can't wait till Friday when we can do X, Y.
I've had that one a lot. Oh, it's only Tuesday. I can't wait till Friday. Right. And I can stick with it, but then it's taking up space in my mind. And when you decide not to, you just decide once and then you're done.
Yeah. And then you're just like, well, I'm not drinking. What else am I going to do on a Friday night? And it helps you be more creative. And, I hadn't realized how my dates with my husband were happy hour or dinner and we drink, or we do something else and we drink, or we go to a baseball game and we drink. And so once you take that off the table, you get more creative. Like I was like, what are we going to do for our anniversary? We always go wine tasting. We went paragliding. I hadn't gone paragliding ever, but I was like, I got to think of something. It was amazing.
That's awesome. I love that. Well, I think that's a great place to end. If people want to find you, if they're interested in the community you have, if they feel like they want to give this a try, but maybe they would like to work with a sober coach and not do it on their own, what is the best way for them to find you?
Thank you. hellosomedaycoaching.com is the best way to find me. And if you're interested in my sobriety program, that's at sobrietystarterkit.com.
Well, this was so great, Casey. I so appreciate you coming on and sharing your wisdom. Thank you. And I'll see you again soon. Thank you for listening to Psychologists Off the Clock. You can now listen to our podcast ad-free by becoming a supporter on Patreon. You can link to Patreon on our website or go to patreon.com/offtheclocksite.
If you enjoy our podcast, you can help us out by leaving a review and sharing this episode with a friend or an enemy who would enjoy it.
You can get more psychology tips by subscribing to our fabulous newsletter on Substack. Or if you're still addicted to social media, find us on Instagram and LinkedIn.
We'd like to thank our rockstar production manager, Jadine Stout-Williams.
Now for the boring part. This podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes only and is not meant to be a substitute for mental health treatment. If you're looking for mental health treatment, please visit the resources page of our website, offtheclockpsych.com.